Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu declares that his forces are, quote, weeks away, end quote, from total victory. So he says. And the last phase of this is going to be an attack into the area of Rafah, where he claims that the remaining battalions of Hamas are certainly currently holed up, and he's going to go into there very soon. Perhaps he may have a short pause just to keep his American benefactors happy and go for some hostage release. But he says whether he does or whether he doesn't seem to be too concerned. But in fact, he says we are going to go into Rafah no matter what. Now, as we're going to lay out in this episode here today, we're going to show you why that's nonsense. And actually, as the title of this episode is called, could lay the death warrant for Israel. And that day could indeed be weeks away from realization as they discover that what total victory looks like is radically different than what he has in his mind. Because as Daniel Davis Deep Dive always has here, we care about the reality and the truth on the ground, what the hard realities are, not what anybody spinning or making happy words to talk about it. And we got nobody better to discuss that today than show favorite Matthew Ho, former combat Marine, which is going to play into some of the questions I'm going to ask him today, as well as a former State Department official. Matt, we're really grateful to have you back on the show today.
Thanks, Danny. Thank you for having me back on.
Always a pleasure for us because you've got so many insights because you have experience both at the diplomatic level, at the highest levels, as well as military. And that combination is so rare and so necessary to really penetrate into some of these statements. So often, Matt, people hear, the foreign heads of state or senior State Department officials or military officials say things on TV and, they don't really know for themselves whether something's right or not. If it sounds conviction or, they say it with conviction, if they have a lot of gravitas in their voice, that people kind of tend to believe it sometimes. And then when they see what the person says with what their eyes see on the ground, sometimes they have a hard time, reconciling those two things. That's where we like to have people like you in that can come and help that reconciliation and realize, no, these guys are nonsense. These guys are saying stuff that's just not even accurate in most cases. And like so many do, they'll mix in a little things, a few that are reality, a few truths with some significant untruths that take it in a very different direction. We're going to expose some of that because we love to hold people's feet to the fire and accountability, whether they want it to or not. And the stakes for this one, Matt, are so high because so many tens of thousands of innocent Palestinian people. And I always like to say that because too many times we use this tag of the Palestinians like it's this disembodied concept. No, these are individual human beings just as valuable as any other human being on the planet, as any other person in Israel, as any other person in America, equally value and need to have the same level of protection as all those who were innocent. And that's what gets lost in all of this. And you're going to see some pretty graphic exceptions or examples of what's not happening and what we argue should. So let's first of all start off because Benjamin Netanyahu went on Face the Nation yesterday and made a number of pretty eye-opening statements and pretty brash and bold statements. And we're gonna dissect them and show you what's really going on. First of all, he wants to start off by saying, he's heard a lot of things about a lot of people saying things that just, warnings and dangers that, just turned out not to be true. So here's
a lot of things that we were told by the best of friends initially turned out not to be true. They said you can't enter the ground war without having enormous complications. They said you can't enter Gaza City. You can't go into the tunnels. It'll be a terrible bloodbath. All of that turned out to be not true. Our soldiers are in the tunnel network. We don't have to take apart hundreds of kilometers of tunnels. We are taking apart the missile production factories that are underground, the command and control headquarters, the computers that are there, the money that is there, the weapons that are there, and the ammos that is there. We're doing that methodically. You can't substitute for the Israeli military command, and we're doing it very responsibly. John Spencer, who's the head of urban warfare at West Point, says that no other army has gone to the lengths that Israel's army has gone to clear civilians out of harm's way, even though Hamas is doing everything to keep them in harm's way.
Okay. First of all, nobody ever said you couldn't do it. You have an Israeli military that is the most modern and large and powerful in the region, bar none. And the Palestinians have some sticks and rocks and a few rockets, some old rockets and some rifles. Nobody ever said you couldn't do that. What he didn't even address in there as the Palestinian people who are extremely paying the bill for all of this, destruction of the Gaza Strip, the physical wiping out of the ability for this place to hold life. They are paying the bill. So people said you can't go in there without causing this damage. That turned out to be true.
Absolutely. It reminds me of what Andrew Basovich said about the United States invading Iraq. It's like Ohio State playing Bowling Green. They're going to win 56-7. What's the you don't need to have any type of expertise or experience or any insight to understand that of course the Israelis could methodically go through Gaza and destroy it. Now, what Netanyahu and many others are failing to understand is that your destruction, the killing, the devastation, the immiseration of the Palestinians, coupled with the destruction of the Palestinian or the Gazan infrastructure, should not be mistaken for anything other than tactical accomplishments, right? And that in terms of strategic the strategic place that the Israelis are in, how are they in a better place today than they were 5 months ago? And I think this is what many of us were saying is why don't do this, because strategically, where is this going to lead to? Yeah, no kidding. You can go in and destroy all of Gaza. You can kill all these people, men, women, children. You'll kill any Gazan fighter, any Hamas fighter who comes out in the street to fight you. But that's not how they're going to fight you. And more importantly, the killing of all those people, the destruction of their homes is only going to further increase resistance. You've made it so that Hamas is now more popular than it ever was, not just in Gaza, not just in Palestine, but across the world. And I'm saying Hamas specifically, not just the Palestinian people. I mean, so what has Israel done strategically here has been incredibly reckless, and it's proving to be counterproductive. The only thing Israel has going for it is the fact that it is a client state of the United States, and so it can depend upon the United States to provide all the different forms of support the U.S. has been supporting for the last 5 months. But if it didn't have that, the position Israel would be in would be absolutely catastrophic. But even
Matt, I want to talk about that part here in just a second, because there's going to be another clip that really sets this up. But the one thing I want to talk on before we shift on to the next part here is he mentioned there, Netanyahu, at the end, that a guy named John Spencer from the U.S. West Point has said there is no army in the history of the world who has been more careful on the civilian population than Israel in this Gaza Strip operation. And that just beggars just jaw-dropping, what in God's name are you talking about? Now, I don't know for sure who this John Spencer is. I looked up on him online as soon as I'd seen this, and he does say some things that I think are just completely untrue. He doesn't go quite as far as Netanyahu is giving credit for, but as someone who has fought in these kinds of operations where we actually do try to take care of the civilian population, can you say from your personal experience that what they're doing is similar to what the United States does when we try to go after bad guys while taking care of the civilian population?
No. I mean, it's not equivalent at all. And I don't know Spencer either. I only know him from online. I think everyone should be very concerned that someone like him, with that level of analysis and that willingness to shill for the Israeli government, is the director of the Urban Warfare Center at West Point. I think everyone should be greatly concerned about that. But I think that's more in line with how the American military has evolved over these last decades, where it really has become so corrupted. Let's all remember that both West Point and the Army War College have put out reports saying that the Army has a culture of lying infested in it. And you see that when you could have somebody at West Point say that the Israelis are trying to protect civilian lives in a manner unlike any other army in the history of the world. That's just absolute nonsense. I mean, I just don't understand how someone could say that, knowing everything we know, as well as having participated in how we fought in both Iraq and Afghanistan, is simply not the case. I mean, I don't know how much we can, how much detail you want to go into it, but it simply is not the case. This is clearly an apples and orange. I've got a lot of criticism for what we did in Iraq and Afghanistan. A lot of criticism. We killed a lot of innocent people. We ruined millions and millions of lives. However, our operations there were not anywhere near the genocidal actions of the Israeli military in Gaza. Our goals simply were not ethnic cleansing. So even in the worst of the urban battles, say in Fallujah in 2004, where a lot of Iraqis were killed, and you know, that was there were war crimes committed by U.S. forces. It was nothing at all like what the Israelis have done to Gaza City, to Khan Yunis, to what they will do to Rafah. So just this willingness to make that comparison and to say that, it just shows a complete corruption of character where someone's willing to lie.
And look, I can add too, because I saw a lot more in Afghanistan than I did in Iraq, and I can guarantee you for absolute certainty, firsthand on the ground, is I watched American troops go to great lengths to genuinely profess, especially the tactical level, where the man on the ground really did care about not harming anyone who wasn't a Taliban at the time. And like you, I've taken a lot of what we did to task, but I can tell you that at the troop level, at the on the ground level, we actually tried very hard to protect the civilians. Whereas right now, look, I don't care what anybody says out loud, Matt, and I'm pretty sure you're with me on this. The actions on the ground indicate that someone is designed to destroy as much of the infrastructure as possible, to casually kill whoever happens to be in the way with no concern at all, and that they want to. And I know for a certain fact that there is at least a couple of different cabinet members in Netanyahu's government who wants to drive them out and wants it to make it unlivable. Those are the on-the-ground realities, no matter what Netanyahu ever says out loud.
Right. I mean, we really should stress this point. I mean, I had Marines who didn't fire their weapons at times because they weren't certain whether they were allowed to, when clearly they were allowed to. I had a Marine who was shot one time, Corporal Cook, God rest him, he's passed away. But Corporal Cook got shot. He returned fire, and then when I was talking to him in the hospital, he was really concerned he was going to get in trouble for having fired his weapon. I mean, that's how tight and strict the rules of engagement were for American forces. And this was in Anbar province in 2006. So, I mean, like, you couldn't, there was no more violent place than Anbar except for Baghdad. I mean, so that was how strict we were with our rules of engagement. And even then, because of just the nature of war, nature of occupation, what we did was horrific, right? Because that's just the nature of warfare. You know, it's those things are going to occur. Those atrocities, those crimes, those acts of inhumanity are going to occur because that's warfare. That's the reality of it. But what we're talking about here, what the Israelis have been doing, and so on top of just as I just was saying, how war in general is going to be inhumane, it's going to be horrific, there's going to be atrocities. When it's deliberate, as the Israelis are doing, that counter reaction that is going to come from the Palestinian people, that has been coming from the Palestinian people for decades now. You know, October 7th was something that came out of the relief valve of that, right? I mean, that there's October 7th, as terrible as it was inevitable, because when you oppress a people, when you occupy them, when you humiliate them, they are going to fight back, and that's what it looked like on October 7th.
And we're gonna get into that a little bit more of that in just a second. But now then, let's go. Speaking of things that are not reality on the ground, the next thing Netanyahu talks about is what his next objective is. We'll start with this one.
Once we begin the Rafah operation, the intense phase of the fighting is weeks away from completion. Not months, weeks away from completion. And that is, we've already destroyed 18 out of the 24 Hamas terrorist battalions. So we have and 4 of them are concentrated in Rafah. We can't leave the last Hamas stronghold without taking care of it. Obviously, we have to do it. But understand, too, that I've asked the Army to submit to me a double plan. First, to evacuate, to enable the evacuation of the Palestinian civilians in Gaza, and obviously, second, to destroy the remaining Hamas battalions. That gets us a real distance towards the completion of our victory, and that we're not going to give it up. If we have a deal, it'll be delayed somewhat, but it'll happen. If we don't have a deal, we'll do it anyway. It has to be done. because total victory is our goal, and total victory is within reach, not months away, weeks away, once we begin the operation.
Weeks away, total victory is away. We're going to go in to the Rafah area, which is the last major stronghold. So he says, but then you have on the other side, you have the United States has been saying, yeah, hang on, let's be a little bit more careful, because the Biden administration is now starting to get a lot of political blowback among its supporters in the United States, which is probably the only thing. Morality apparently is not on the table anymore as being a constraining device. But political support among those that you need to get reelected does seem to have some effect. So Biden is now starting to equivocate a little bit like this.
First of all, I've had extensive conversations with the Prime Minister of Israel over the last several days, almost an hour each. And I've made the case, and I feel very strongly about it, that there has to be a temporary ceasefire to get the prisoners out, to get the hostages out. And that is underway. I'm still hopeful that that can be done. And in the meantime, I don't anticipate, I'm hoping that that the Israelis will not make any massive land invasion in the meantime.
So that was February 16th, where Biden very emphatically and determinedly says, I hope that they don't do anything. And you see how much impact that had on Netanyahu when he said this yesterday.
We're on the same page with the U.S. on this, because that's how we do it. The reason you have that population in Rafah is because we actually cleared them away from the other places, the zones, combat zones that we had. That's why they're there. So now there's room for them to go north of Rafah to the places that we've already finished fighting in.
Okay. Remember that. We're on the same sheet of music as Americans. 25 February. Here's something another American said on the same day that Brady makes it like they're not quite on the same sheet.
We're talking about more than 1 million people who have been pushed into this small space in Gaza because of military operations elsewhere. It's also the area where all of the humanitarian assistance comes into Gaza to serve all of Gaza. And so we've been clear that we do not believe that a major military operation should proceed in Rafah unless there is a clear and executable plan to protect those civilians, to get them to safety, and to feed, clothe, and house them. And we have not seen a plan like that.
We have not seen a plan like that, where Netanyahu clearly already has his plan, whether President Biden says something or whether Jake Sullivan says something, he's rolling through for what he ever says. Now, I know you probably got a lot to say on that, but before you do, one thing I want to touch on what he just said there is that victory is weeks away, because once he gets those last 4 battalions of Hamas, which is such a strange thing to say in this kind of warfare, like there's, these battalions with companies and platoons that are just sitting out there, and as soon as you knock them out and take them off the board, war's going to be over. So what do you think is going to happen? And let's say that he actually accomplishes his tactical task, and I don't know, a month from now, he has checked off this box in all 4 of those remaining battalions. And so there are no longer any Hamas battalions out there, and he claims victory. What happens the next day? What does the security look like in Israel?
Well, I'm sure because Hamas is very good at this, as well as Palestinian Islamic Jihad and a number of other groups, let alone, say, Hezbollah and Lebanon. The day after he makes that announcement of victory, they're going to fire rockets at Tel Aviv, right? I mean, like the foolishness on display here, and whether it's foolishness pushed by arrogance or by ignorance, I can't really say, but the foolishness. It's so reminiscent, Danny, of what you and I saw in Afghanistan and Iraq. This failure to understand the warfare that you're in, the failure to understand the dynamics behind the resistance, who's supporting the insurgency and why. All these things seem to be as lost on the Prime Minister of Israel as they were lost upon the Americans in Iraq and Afghanistan for so many years. This idea that you just got to knock out these remaining 4 battalions and then it's over it's hard to come up with the right way to describe it in terms of how wrong-headed that is. They're mistaking, the Israelis are mistaking this idea that if you plant your command flag someplace, that means that there's no more enemy presence, which is just anyone who understands the basic outlines and realities of guerrilla warfare say, no, that's just not the case. And the number of times that you and I would talk about this, say about Afghanistan, where we claimed, we, the U.S. or ISAF, the International Security Force, claimed to have control over certain Afghan districts. It only because we had a company of Marines or soldiers stationed in the district's capital who didn't control anything more than what their machine guns could hit. We claimed, right? We claimed that was our what's.
I remember one of the first conversations you and I had at a metro stop that we first met in 2009, shortly after you had gained some notoriety with having resigned from the State Department. And I sought you out because I had been to, at that point, one Afghan deployment and wanted to kind of compare notes. One of the things I remember you told me so vividly, having just returned, was that every time you think you're going to go in and you're going to kill your way to peace, and you kill all these guys, all you end up doing is making more enemy. Right. Because and in this case, it seems to me like it's as on steroids as anything has ever been in mankind's history and in this kind of warfare. Every time we go in there and wipe out, this area where 50, 100 women and children are killed, even if they had absolutely nothing to do with Hamas, what does anyone think that the male surviving members of those families are going to do? I wonder if you could talk on that for a second and how the culture in the region is viewed, and if you saw any direct relations to this in Afghanistan and how that's played out before, because to me, it seems like that by Netanyahu's actions here, even if he technically destroys these 4 battalions, the number of enemies now created against Israel is tenfold what it was on 10/7.
That's exactly correct, Danny. I'm reminded we had when I was in Iraq, we had a 500-pound bomb kill one of our tanks one time, killed all 4 crew members in it. And I remember thinking, we were discussing, not about what was troubling was the fact that how long would it take to put a 500-pound bomb in the ground? How many people would notice you doing it? And how come nobody turned in the resistance for it? How come nobody, right? How much support did they have to have, active and passive, just to do that one action of putting a 500-pound bomb in the ground? Because it takes a lot of work, right? And people are going to notice it. And that's what we were talking about here. It's just not the men who are going to pick up the rifles, who are going to pick up the RPGs, who are going to put the IEDs in the ground. We're talking about the entire support network that will radiate out from those fighters. So whether it's those who are performing logistics or finance roles, those who are doing the social media, those who are providing safe houses for them to sleep, those who are working as messengers, basically. You can think of all the different roles and think about all the various ways insurgencies have fought, and realize that what it requires is a spirit of resistance across the population, a unifying spirit of resistance across the population. And the best way to ensure that insurgency has that is to kill a lot of innocent people, right? To make it so that it's just not the occupation that the people are against, but it's against the inhumanity that it represents, right? So it's just not that you are a foreign occupying power, but it is that you represent the other. You represent the consummate, evil in a Manichaean tale of good versus evil. And if that's what you're going to try, that's what you're going to accomplish by trying to kill your way to victory, then you will be there forever until you have killed everyone. Now, the idea, though, is that we have to recall that part of what Israel is doing, if not all of what Israel is doing, is based upon an ethnic cleansing campaign. So the idea of eradicating the Palestinian population, particularly making Gaza such a hell, making it so unlivable and uninhabitable that you eventually get to the point where you're able to force them out into Sinai, say, and whether or not the Egyptians would ever allow that, we're to see. But, if that's what you cannot do, if you can't forcibly migrate the population, cleanse the population, then you're stuck having to subjugate them. And
Yeah,
that
and Matt, let
is
me interrupt you for a second because it's a good point too. Because yesterday in Netanyahu's interview, he was asked about that exact question about the population being forced out and what Egypt might do. Here's what he said.
You can't say, oh, you give immunity to the terrorists because they're hiding among civilians and forcing civilians not to leave. So what do? You say, okay, we'll give you immunity. Hamas survives, will live to fight another, to commit another massacre and another massacre. What would America do?
Yeah.
What would America do if you faced the equivalent of 29/11s, 50,000 Americans slaughtered in one day, 10,000 Americans, including mothers and children, held hostage? Would you not be doing what Israel is doing? You'd be doing a hell of a lot more.
By the way, that math he loves to throw up there, that it's the equivalent of 50,000 Americans killed. Keeping consistent with that, the math on the other is half of that equation he loves to forget is somewhere like 400,000 Palestinians killed of their population. It might even be more today. That's what it was a while back. So yeah, you want to do that math, you got to do the same thing on either side. But then he was asked about Egypt in particular.
Can you guarantee that they won't push Palestinians out of Gaza and into Egypt? As you know, Egyptian officials have said if you do that, you are putting at risk 46 years of peace.
Look, I think that the Egyptians know very well that that's not our purpose, and that won't be the result. And we're coordinating. We're talking to the Egyptians all the time. So that's not, I don't think that's an issue. The peace between Israel and Egypt to serve the interest of both countries and will continue to serve the interest of both countries. I don't think it's in any danger.
Okay, Matt. So here's the point I want to make right here. I want to make one more juxtaposition here to really drive this point home. So again, Netanyahu now at the diplomatic level is talking just absolutely insanity. Just like, this is what I want to be the truth. So it is, and I'm going to do whatever I want. I'm sure they're talking to Egypt. There's no question that they are. And Egypt has been very clear on what it's been saying. And there's also very little doubt based on what's happening on the ground that is still Netanyahu's desire. He would love nothing more than to shove those people into Egypt and still maintain his peace, because he wants his cake and eat it too. But it's not just Egypt he plays that with. Here's something that he said, and there's a phrase he uses in here, and I want you to touch on a little bit, because I know you're very familiar with this, that is like gasoline on the fire to the Palestinian people, that he wants to live in peace and he wants to subjugate. Check this out here. This is from a little bit past ago.
For 30 years, I am very consistent, and I'm saying something very simple. This conflict is not on the lack of a state of Palestinian, but the existence of a state, the Jewish state. And therefore, I clarify that in other arrangement, in the future, the state of Israel have to control on the entire area from the river to the sea. This is what happens when you have sovereignty. This truth I say to our American friends. And I also stopped the attempt to impose on us a reality that will jeopardize us. A prime minister in Israel has to be able to say no when you need to and to say yes when you can.
Yeah, I like the way he puts it at the end. There's a little bit of honesty that seeps out, that I'll say yes if I can, but otherwise, yeah, no, I'm going to do whatever I want. And this whole from the river to the sea, what does that mean to the Palestinian people?
Well, first, it'd be nice if the President of the United States had that type of conviction, and the willingness to understand that you have to say no. But this phrase of from the river to the sea, of course, refers from the basically Jordan, from the east of the eastern boundaries of Palestine. So from the Dead Sea, the Jordan River, westward to the Mediterranean Sea, from the river to the sea. And both the Palestinians and Israelis have used this over the decades. Somehow in the last couple decades, the use by the Palestinians of that phrase became a matter of hysteria for many on the Israeli side, to the point that about 10 years or so ago, a contributor on CNN, Mark Lamont Hill, got booted from CNN for saying those words, from the river to the sea. But the Israelis have used that phrasing as well for quite a while. The Likud party, which is Benjamin Netanyahu's party, has had it in their charter as part of the party platform, that there will be, just as you heard Netanyahu say, full Jewish sovereignty, full control from the river to the sea. And that's the idea that there will be a Jewish ethno-national state.
And that there will be no Palestinian state now or ever.
And they've been clear about that. They've been especially clear in the last few weeks. Netanyahu put out a statement about that. His cabinet unanimously affirmed it. And then the Israeli parliament, the Knesset, actually made the language more aggressive and affirmed it as well, that there will be no Palestinian state. They will say things like, there is a two-state solution, but it must be based upon direct negotiations. And they put this phrasing and this wordage around it, and they dress it up and make it sound like they are interested in some type of diplomatic solution, but they're not. That's just lip service. And we could see also too, through their actions over the decades, that they're simply not interested in that. Look, you go back to 1967, the 67 war that Israel launched, that was a land grab. And that's been made clear by the Israelis' own documents, by what Israeli historians have put forth. Like, this was the plans of the Israelis at the time. And this is what the Israeli generals said, and the politicians said as well. This was a land grab. So what you're talking about here, when you're talking about the occupied territories of the West Bank, East Jerusalem, Gaza, this has been part of the Israeli objective.
So here's the problem, Matt, because last week Netanyahu also again emphatically said that there not only would not be a two-state solution, because he said that would, quote, reward terrorism in the highest way. So he's saying that because of what Hamas did here, now then Palestine will never have a two-state solution, even though you still have the West, especially the United States, still claiming that's our objective. You have Jake Sullivan continuing to say that that's what we're trying to achieve. But what's going to happen in the last few minutes we have here, I'd like you to address this. What's going to happen in a few weeks? Let's just assume that the Rafah operation goes in, no matter the human carnage that it results. And then at some point, Netanyahu says, yay, we won and we did that. Or do you think that he'll say, well, we almost won, but now we need another 5 months or something to that effect? But in any case, once that phase is done, what happens to the Palestinian people if they're not forced out into Egypt? Because now then you have an issue to where there's nowhere for 2 million people to live. So I don't know how that's going to work out long term. I don't know what the region is going to do. And what about the United States? Let's go back to the ugly truth of electoral politics in the United States. What is Biden going to do if his voters, especially the young voters who are very much turning against this war, say that we're going to demonstrate our displeasure at the ballot box? What will Biden do with those very powerful opposite pressures on him?
I think what you're going to see from the administration is these continual, just like we saw from your clip with Jake Sullivan, these worthless protestations by the American administration, saying the Israelis have to be careful, the Israelis need to back off, the Israelis can't do anything that's going to cause deliberate civilian harm. So all these words that are couched with caveats, all these statements that are pretty much empty statements, but are being issued for the for the administration's domestic political benefit. So that when this invasion of Rafah does occur, when Gaza has finally and completely been razed, when there is almost no, say, housing left available in Gaza, as spring comes, and the situation there is just dire, the administration will say, well, we told them not to do this. We were firm with them. We told them not to do this. Meaning the whole time that the Israelis knew that the administration was just signaling to its domestic audience. The Israelis understand the American political system as well or better than we do. Because they manipulate it so well. They utilize their lobby so well to own it. essentially. So I think what you're going to see from the American administration is like, yeah, these continued statements warning Netanyahu not to commit genocide, not to ethnically cleanse, not to destroy Rafah. Then when he does, they're going to say, look, we said we warned him. But then what they will also say is that they didn't do it deliberately. We don't see the evidence of war crimes. We don't believe this was genocide. We believe that the Israelis did everything they could to to protect the civilians. And so, I mean, how can you even deal with people like this who are going to say that the Israelis gave the people of Rafah warning? They urged them to evacuate, to where? To Khan Yunis, which is being bombed continuously, which the Israeli army is going door to door, destroying everything in its path. That's where they are supposed. But they're going to say that. And this is that we're up against.
And Matt, the thing that here's what I think is the so what of all this, as this episode is titled here, Israel's death warrant going into Rafah. What I fear is that by the U.S. administration being afraid to ever say no to Netanyahu, ever say no to anything that he wants to do, and allow this word salad to go on that has no substance, we're harming Israel. Because when they get to this point, that unless Egypt decides to open the gates, and I can't imagine that they would, then there will be no solution to this. This Israel will have no security. They'll have worse insecurity because there will constantly be desires for revenge, and there will be no shortage of people in the region, like those that attack the United States and some of these militia, to get weapons and ammunition somehow. They'll always find a way to get those things in there, and the resistance will, if we think it was bad, as you touched on earlier in this show, all the things that had led up to October 7th would cause all this pressure, and then it finally blew. The idea that pressure would somehow be lessened after Netanyahu finishes doing what he's going to do is just belies any kind of logic at all. It's not going to. It's going to be even supercharged. And there's going to be so much anger outside of this, as we see with the Houthis, as we see with these Iran-backed groups in Iraq and Syria, and God only knows where else. All that stuff will continue on. And so Israel is literally, in my view, building insecurity for itself by going blindly down this military first path.
Right. I think what we're going to see, Danny, is they're gonna go through with their invasion of Rafah. They're going to declare victory, as Netanyahu said. And then they are going to transition to a new phase. They'll call it stability operations or security and stability operations, or some remake of whatever we call what we were doing in Iraq and Afghanistan. And then that'll transition into just a different phase of immiseration for the Palestinians, where nothing is being rebuilt. There's no place for them to live. They are still all kept in these camps, basically. The Israelis will keep the aid flowing in to Gaza at a bare minimum, as they've been doing these last couple of weeks, where we've seen 30, 40 trucks getting in a day of aid. And you could see from their satellite images where you could see from space where all the trucks are lined up waiting to get into Gaza, and the Israelis won't let them in. I think we're going to continue to see that, just to the point where you have starvation, you have disease. You're still going to have plenty of Israeli military action. It just won't look the same. It'll be more sparing and not as constant, but it'll be enough to terrify everybody and make it so that nobody with any sense will want to stay there with their family. People be watching their children starve to death. They'll watch them be dying from disease, and there'll be such a pressure to get out that the Egyptians will be overwhelmed. The Israelis will open the doors from the inside, so to speak, or from the outside, and let the Palestinians into Egypt. And I think that's what you're looking at. The other thing to remember, too, is that you have this whole issue with Lebanon. And over the weekend, we didn't get into this at all, but over the weekend, you had Yoav Gallant, the Israeli defense minister, saying that any cessation of Israeli military action in Gaza will mean an increase in military action in Lebanon. So, you have this fear too of okay, so maybe 2-3 months, Danny, what are we talking about here on your show? Is it this transition where they've declared victory in Gaza? They are doing, because we've got to remember what the Israelis have been saying continuously for the last 5 months. And you'll see from the far right, from those who've been urging the ethnic cleansing of Gaza for a long time, this phrase of encourage voluntary migration. Well, I think that's what they're going to attempt to do in Gaza, is encourage voluntary migration. Voluntary being, of course, because you're being bombed, because the Israeli army is there terrorizing you, because your children are starving to death, they're dying from disease. So your migration is voluntary. But then we then see a shift in that phase, or a transition, I should say, from Gaza to the next step in Israel's desire for a greater Israel, which is pushing into Lebanon. Because again, remember, we were just talking about how the Israelis understand the American political system as well as we do. And are the Israelis looking at this opportunity in a total sense, where it's just not about Gaza, but it's just not about the West Bank, but it's about greater Israel? And this may be the best chance for us to do what we want that we're ever going to get, because of how weak politically Joe Biden is this election year. Is this our best opportunity? Plus, as well, Netanyahu's very own precarious position in power. He needs this national emergency to continue basically forever in order to stay in power. So why not? If all these things are lined up, why not do this? You may not get another chance like you're getting right now to do all the things that you've wanted to do, which in this case would be extending greater Israel up and through the Litani River.
And the perverse part is that he is in a position of power to do that. It does appear that he has the domestic power within his government at the very least, and certainly a significant portions of the Israeli population do support this, even though there's lots of protests that don't get covered much on the West here in the streets of Israel against a lot of the things he's doing here. But the bottom line, though, and the thing that's just so anguishing, is that the bill payers for all this are going to be the innocent people in Israel, in Palestine, and in Lebanon if this continues to go on. Almost the only thing that can stop them at this point is the president of the United States finally growing a backbone, finally finding his morality, and stepping in and doing what's necessary to save Israel from itself and to save the Palestinians from any more pointless carnage. But I know. Okay, go ahead.
Two things on that. One, say you had a president who was willing to do that, and I don't know who that would be, but say there was one. Say there was a President Danny Davis, which would be fantastic for so many reasons, right? But, say President Davis said, you know what? That's it, Netanyahu. No more weapons, no more spare parts, no more intelligence support. We're not gonna veto the resolutions at the UN, et cetera, et cetera. You would be faced with impeachment from the House of Representatives immediately, and the House and Senate would pass bills supporting Israel, providing all this stuff as acts of law that would have veto-proof majorities. So, I mean, that's the reality of Israel as a client state, and that's what we have to use the term.
I would argue that a man like President Matt Hoe, for example, who did this on a different scale, would say, "You want to impeach me? Impeach the hell out of me, because I'm going to do the right thing, and I don't care what you say." And then I bet they would back down. So if there was such a president, I bet he would be willing to go to the mat. But Matt, damn it, there's not one. Nobody's willing, because they realize the political reality you just described. So they're not willing to take a risk for their career over the physical lives of thousands of other people. That just gets my crawl.
It does. And then the other thing that you touched on again, Danny, was just how much of a danger this is to Israel. And Netanyahu alludes to it in his own, one of those clips you showed, in his own words, about when he's referring to what would the United States do if October 7th happened to you? And of course, we responded with the global war on terror after 9/11, which has been catastrophic for the United States. We've spent $7 trillion on those wars. We have thousands dead from it. We have hundreds of thousands of invisible wounds. We have a complete gutting of our civil liberties. What happened to our First and Fourth Amendment? Oh, the global war on terror happened to our First and Fourth Amendment. We can just go through all the ways that the United States really hurt itself. It continues to hurt itself because of its reaction to 9/11, let alone the blow it took in terms of its presence on the world stage. Would the BRICS be a real threat to the United States if not for how the United States handled itself after 9/11, right? Just as one example. But then you have to also realize that, unlike Israel, we've got two oceans that defend us. we've got the world's reserve currency. I mean, like, we've got all these things that are buffers, are insulators that Israel doesn't have. So the danger to Israel because of this is Netanyahu is pointing at 9/11 and saying that we're just doing exactly what you did. And he's not understanding what a disaster that has been. Then what can befall the Israelis is going to be absolutely catastrophic potentially.
Yeah, and what you have there is the same dynamic, although a bit stronger on the Israeli side, is blind rage and unchecked power, because there's nobody politically in Israel right now that can check his power. So he's free to do what he wants. The only possible check on his power is in Washington, D.C., and it's unwilling to assert itself. So this is the result that you have. And Matt, it almost always has a negative result. And I'm afraid we're going to see something probably worse than what we suffered, as you just laid out there. But that's all the hot time we have today. So we'll definitely continue on. This is unfortunately not going anywhere. We're going to continue to discuss the situation as it evolves. And as always, we are unintimidated and uncompromised. I don't care what anybody thinks politically. We are going to give you the truth because you deserve it. And we are going to hold people's feet to the fire when they make these kinds of statements that don't have any teeth, especially if it's in your name. We're going to hold them accountable. You can count on us to keep doing that. Tune in tomorrow. We've got a couple of great shows. We have Jason Beardsley coming on. And then Tony Schaefer is going to talk some spy stuff that's going on, especially in the Ukraine war. You won't want to miss that. He's always got some great things to say. 2 o'clock tomorrow Eastern. Join us for that. And we will see you next time on Daniel Davis Deep Dive.